He's Carl Livingston, Reverend Carl Livingston, who also teaches political science at Seattle Central Community College and is the author of a book called Shoestrings and Bootstraps, A Development Plan for Black America. He helped us out on Inauguration Day with our coverage, and it's a pleasure to have you in the studio, Carl.
I'm so glad to be here.
You were working with Pastor Robert Jeffrey, who, back in the early days of the show would come on every February to debate Black Dollar Days. Does he still do that? Do you know?
I know he's still involved in it, yes.
Yeah. But he was a bootstrap kind of guy. And the idea, of course, behind Black Dollar Days was for black people to patronize black merchants, and it was very, very controversial. But his bottom line was that we don't want to ask for subsidies, handouts, welfare, food stamps. If there is an economic problem in the black community, then it's the black community's job to solve it. Where has the discussion gone from there? I mean, has there been, in your opinion, sufficient progress on that front?
No, there has not been sufficient progress on that front. I do want to laud Pastor Jeffrey because he's actually taken it the next step by starting a farmer's market in the neighborhood.
Has he?
Yes, sir. He's launching basically a black business and providing something useful and showing people how it's done. But the community at large has not really progressed very, very much, and it's because we really don't understand well the system within which we live, move, breathe, and operate. Our leaders don't.
That being what?
Capitalism. We're not very good at it.
Black people don't understand capitalism?
Our leaders don't quite understand that not enough help will come from above, from without the community to really pick the entire community up. And therefore, a group is left to largely have to pick itself up. And it has to be done in a capitalist way, including everything else that we need. Now, we need all kind of things. We got to work on our relationships.
What the white do-gooders on the outside will say, well, of course, black people don't understand capitalism because you need capital, and black communities typically don't have a lot of capital. So what do you expect?
And I guess that makes a little sense, except that we've got some rather smart people in our community. And I rather think that if we were to assume that they would be able to grasp it as well, or if we would hold our leaders to the standard that leaders outside the community hold themselves, we'd probably find that these leaders would come around and slowly begin to see that if you're really going to stop the shooting in the community, if you're going to begin to put families back together, we've got to go the way of the three target groups I have in this book: Jewish Americans, Vietnamese Americans, and Ethiopian Americans, and find ways. It'll be a little different in the African American community, but find ways to launch businesses, to teach the importance of owning more than you owe, and work together. Not everyone has to do it. We just have to have enough.
So the Jews, the Vietnamese, and the Ethiopians are your role models.
Exactly. They're the target groups. Jewish Americans, because they show how high a group can go in this country. And they're the most successful group over the last 150 years. Vietnamese Americans, because they show that non-whites can do it, starting in a hood near you. They did that around the 1970s, and not with a lot of resources from outside the community. And, of course, they're not white, and so that helps those African Americans to say, only white people can do well in this society. Ethiopian Americans are very, very helpful because they're doing it right now around us. And they're darker than the typical African American.
Yes.
So that helps me with the African Americans that go, okay, well, maybe some non-whites can do it, but not anyone that looks like me.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is it they're doing differently then? I mean, you're saying race is not what's keeping people down. That's what you seem to be saying.
Well,
it's your actions. It's actions that are keeping people down.
I'm saying that it is a factor. It's gotten better every generation, and despite the fact that it's a factor, there is not enough help from outside that's going to pick any people up.
Yeah.
And African Americans just cannot wait. So for those that say, oh, you're saying the onus is on blacks and it's all their fault, I'm saying, well, not quite. I'm saying the reality of the situation is that they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to do it. And
So
so
stop worrying about whose fault it is. Just decide whether you want some things to change or not.
we just lose time when we do that. We lose another
Okay,
generation.
so let's talk about the Ethiopians then. So your point is that here are people who look blacker than the average African American.
That's correct.
And yet whose community has managed to succeed here, even though they started with very little. So
Yes.
what have they done differently?
Well, what they have done differently is that through their system of elders and their other system of ethnic and cultural connections, because, there are many different families, sometimes they call them tribes within the Ethiopian community, they have established a type of an elder network. And so what they do is they begin to support one another in the launching of small businesses. In addition, what they do is they come over here already with family structures in place. So they have that advantage African Americans don't have. They have family structures in place. And so the family is there, even during the tough times of building itself up, to keep the kids in line and to have that network that you need. They call it social capital now when they're being fancy. But have that network that you need to begin to build from hardly anything or to build from nothing. Mm-hmm. And so once they start launching these small businesses and putting the pressure on the kids through the family structure to do well in school, then what it is they begin to have jobs for their own folk. And at the same time, they are putting pressure on their kids, that beautiful, wonderful family pressure. Now, you got to go to school and do your homework and do well. The family needs it so that the kids are doing well at the bottom. And so you catch them at the top, at the older, the ones, the 25 and older, and they're launching cab companies, parking lot companies,
right.
And on and on and on. So they've got employment, and that keeps the family together. Because if you go about a generation being the last hired, first fired, struggling like that, you'll end up now your family's falling apart. The situation of African Americans. Then they got the kids doing pretty well, K through 12.
Okay, why is it? Because I think it's people wonder, why is it then that the African American family has so much trouble keeping together if the Ethiopians can do it? I mean, and what would change that?
Okay, we've had so much trouble because of what we have found to be the case. Now, when I say the we, I'm talking about scholars in general. What scholars have found to be the case when we just do mice and rat studies. And that is to say that when you put beings in a situation in which they're confined, they tend to become more violent. When you put them in a situation in which there's a lot of violence, they tend to feed on one another. And even if you add drugs to that situation, that becomes a type of nutrition. The weaker ones in the corner, the stronger ones in the center, worse and worse they get. Feeds on the females really hard. And we've kind of seen that. We've seen it in that coming out of slavery, African Americans were so into the family, they went and found families and put them back together. Our marital rates around 1900, 1920 were rather high, especially for people coming out of slavery.
Right.
And yet, once we hit, going into World War II, we didn't get the jobs, especially the males. They didn't get the jobs and the opportunities they got going into World War I. Moreover, they knew how to farm well. Slavery would teach you that.
Right.
And so, but we were moving into a manufacturing economy. And as they were hitting the segregation and the lynching and all that of the South, because remember, 90% of the African American population is in the South, all the way up to the census of 1910. They had to move west and north. And when they moved there, they moved in these confined conditions. In the East St. Louis's, even Los Angeles's, and Seattle's, believe it or not, in Tacoma. Tacoma, they had to be up in the hilltop area, and in Salishan, in Seattle, they had to be in the central area and some pockets in the south. When they hit these confined areas, couldn't farm, they didn't get the economic opportunities, and all of a sudden now they had tremendous pressure on them. And over time, it's hard.
So the history was lost then.
Together.
I mean, you couldn't. That continuity was lost. Those skills were lost.
Yeah, and it's not so much even a history, or it's just a real simple, basic thing that after a certain bit of time, people, especially the males, will fall into pathologies, drinking alcohol, just leaving We saw it during the Great Depression with even whites just leaving because the situation is so bad. Now, I have something for you to really put a scholarly pin on this, and that is the Moynihan Report, roughly about 1966 or so. Right. He is, at that time, as you well know, the Assistant Secretary of Labor in the Johnson administration, and predicted in a report that the black family is getting ready to untie. He told us why. They didn't get the job opportunities of World War II that they had gotten in World War I. The women did a little bit more, but we went to Rosie the Riveter and a few other folks here and there because we realized these people, once you give them jobs, they don't leave. And so he predicted, it's the United States government predicting, that this family's getting ready to untie. We didn't really pay a lot of attention to the report. We got mired in his statements that, well, the black male is not as strong. If you go back and remember, you're younger. You're old, younger than me.
No, but that report has been cited over and over again as being predictive of what happened.
And see, that makes the point. That makes the point. And what is the point? It's not so much that they forgot how to do it. It's not so much that, and it's definitely not that they weren't able to hold a family together. Black men don't know how to raise children. It's that any people, once you suffer long enough, economic privation, you're going to fall into pathologies. Now, they didn't factor in the crack, powder cocaine epidemic, the guns that came into the neighborhood. It was all a recipe for single parenthood. And single parenthood makes it almost impossible to keep the kids focused on school, because no matter how heroic mom is, she's not going to be there enough. Some of them have a job and a half. And especially those boys who you got to sit on them a little bit to make them do their homework, they're just not going to listen well.
Let's take a break here because I want you to tell us how you then break that cycle, which a lot of people have thrown themselves at this problem, and you're the latest to decide to take the plunge. Carl Livingston is the author of Shoestrings and Bootstraps. He teaches at Seattle Central Community College. We're going to be right back. This is the Dave Ross Show.